They were waiting for him to fail. From the moment Julian Miles stepped into the echoing lecture hall of Hawthorne University, the unspoken verdict had already been passed. He didn't belong here. Not in this elite advanced calculus class, not among the hand-picked few groomed for academia's highest towers, and certainly not as a young, soft-spoken black freshman from a public school no one had heard of. Their glances weren't just curious, they were sharpened. Professors from the department's inner circle had gathered today not for a lecture but for a silent execution. Dr. Evelyn Cross, the cold, calculating head of the mathematics department, was known for eliminating the unworthy in her first few lectures. Her philosophy was simple: excellence doesn't need kindness. Julian sat in the middle row, head slightly lowered, hoodie pulled over his curls. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The numbers in his notebook whispered louder than any defense he could offer, but to some, his skin color spoke louder than his intellect ever would. Dr. Harold Sims, seated in the front row, chuckled under his breath as he scanned the students. When his eyes landed on Julian, his voice was little more than a smug whisper to the colleague beside him. "Let's see how long that one lasts." Julian heard it. He heard everything. But what they didn't know was that in less than an hour, the very system that sought to erase him would be forced to remember his name. The room fell into a stillness so complete, even the hum of laptops seemed to fade. Dr. Evelyn Cross moved across the front of the lecture hall like a judge entering a courtroom. Her heels clicked with cold precision against the tile floor, her silver-rimmed glasses catching the glow of the overhead lights. Every eye lowered as she passed, no one daring to meet her gaze. Her mere presence silenced the room, not by force, but by design. Fear disguised as respect, the kind she had cultivated over decades. Without a greeting, she turned to the board and began to write. The lecture exploded into complexity immediately. Laplace transforms, multivariable limits, vector fields in 4 dimensions. Her hand moved with brutal efficiency, as symbols and equations stacked across the board like an impenetrable wall. Julian watched, his pen unmoving. While the rest of the class scrambled to keep up, copying blindly out of fear of falling behind, Julian didn't write. He was thinking, watching. And then, he frowned. A small error. Barely noticeable. A misapplied transformation, subtle enough to escape even trained eyes. It wouldn't derail the lecture immediately, but it would unravel everything by the time they reached the solution. He scanned the room. No one else noticed, or if they did, no one dared say a word. His heart pounded. He knew what it meant to challenge authority in this room, especially her authority. Cross didn't tolerate mistakes, and certainly didn't tolerate being corrected by students she'd already silently written off. Julian could stay quiet. Let it go, keep his head down and survive the semester. But something in him refused. A lifetime of being underestimated burned beneath his skin. He wasn't here to survive, he was here to matter. He raised his hand. The air shifted. Dr. Cross paused mid-sentence, turning slowly toward him. The piece of chalk in her hand hovered in place like a weapon. "Yes?" she asked, her voice cool and unbothered, though her eyes narrowed slightly. Julian met her gaze without flinching. "There's a mistake in the transform," he said quietly. The lecture hall froze. A few students looked up. A professor in the front smirked, whispering something cruel to Dr. Sims, who nodded in smug agreement. Julian didn't care. Not anymore. This wasn't just a correction. It was the first crack in a wall they believed was unbreakable. The silence in the hall was so thick, it felt like the air itself had frozen. Dr. Evelyn Cross didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her power lay in precision, not volume. She turned slowly to face Julian, her expression unreadable except for the small, deliberate smile tugging at the edge of her lips. Not one of amusement, but of calculation. "A mistake?" she echoed softly, her voice laced with something far more dangerous than anger amusement. She turned back to the board, scanned it briefly with dispassion, then returned her gaze to him. "Are you sure?" Her words weren't a question. They were a test, the kind that doesn't measure knowledge, but nerve. Whispers stirred in the crowd. Dr. Sims leaned back in his chair with a grin that practically begged for Julian to fail. "This is going to be good," he muttered to the professor beside him. Julian didn't blink. "Yes," he said, clearly, firmly. For the first time, something flickered in Dr. Cross's eyes, not doubt, but a faint trace of curiosity. She extended her hand, chalk in her palm like a challenge being offered. "Then fix it." The class reacted with a mix of shock and thinly veiled glee. This was entertainment, now a public spectacle. A freshman correcting Dr. Cross in front of half the faculty? They didn't think he would survive the walk to the board. Julian rose calmly. His hands didn't tremble. He wasn't walking into a trap. He was walking into a moment he had trained for his entire life. He took the chalk from her fingers. They brushed briefly hers, ice cold and rigid, his warm and steady. He faced the board. His mind, already dissecting the sequence, moved faster than his body. Without hesitation, he erased 3 lines. A hush fell deeper over the room. Then, stroke by stroke, he rewrote the equation clean, sharp, exact. The change was subtle but critical, and undeniably correct. For a moment, there was only the sound of chalk against the board. Then, even that stopped. Julian stepped back, silent. Cross stared at the board, crossed her arms, blinked once. She said nothing, because there was nothing to say. And in that moment, the room, the system, all of it shifted. The boy they had once dismissed had just rewritten the truth in front of them all. The chalk clinked softly into the tray. That small sound echoed like a drumbeat in the frozen lecture hall. Julian turned away from the board, calm as ever, and walked back to his seat. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. The silence told him everything. No one dared to mock him now. No one could. But Dr. Evelyn Cross wasn't finished, not by a long shot. She remained at the front of the room, eyes fixed on the solution he'd written. Her arms crossed tighter, as if bracing against a truth she hadn't prepared to face. For a long, quiet moment, she didn't speak. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she turned to a clean section of the board and began to write again faster, more aggressively. Symbols multiplied, integrals layered into nested chaos, derivatives stacked like traps. This wasn't teaching anymore, this was combat. When she finally stepped back, what remained on the board was not a problem designed for undergraduates. It was a brutal composite only seen in upper graduate coursework. A puzzle so complex it would take most students hours to solve. She turned, her voice clipped and clean. "If you're truly confident, Mr. Miles, solve this one." The challenge dropped like a stone in water. Gasps rippled through the class. Several students looked at each other, mouths parted in disbelief. A professor near Dr. Sims actually leaned forward, eyes wide. Even he hadn't expected her to go that far. Julian didn't flinch. He studied the problem. No panic, no hesitation. Then he stood up, walked quietly back to the board, and picked up the chalk once more, as if this were just the next question in an ordinary notebook. Some students began whispering, now more in awe than amusement. Dr. Sims chuckled darkly. He's about to crumble. But he didn't. Julian's hand moved with startling control. Line after line unfolded. Complex symbols simplified, variables aligned, structures reshaped. He wasn't just solving the problem, he was reorganizing it, refining it like a sculptor revealing a statue beneath the stone. The class leaned in. Cross said nothing, but her jaw clenched. Julian set the chalk down, stepped back, and turned around. Still no smile, still no need. The truth was once again written in silence, and this time it was undeniable. For the second time in the same hour, the lecture hall held its breath. Julian's solution, precise, elegant, and infuriatingly correct, stared back at them from the board. Even the guest professors, who had chuckled minutes ago, now exchanged hushed remarks laced with disbelief. And Dr. Evelyn Cross? She stood motionless. She had played her best hand, a doctoral-level trap, and Julian hadn't just solved it, he had mastered it. But she wasn't defeated, not yet. Cross was too calculated to show cracks in public. Instead, she pivoted. She walked back to her lectern, her heels clicking like metronomes of tension. Her fingers rested on a thick, leather-bound textbook, a tome that had broken more spirits than it had ever educated. She lifted it, turned to face the class, and let the weight of her next move drop with her voice. "Mr. Miles," she began, tone smooth as glass, "perhaps the classroom is no longer a suitable stage for your talent." The word talent hung in the air, sour and begrudging. Then she placed the book down and looked him dead in the eyes. "There's a National Mathematics Championship next month. The best minds from MIT, Stanford, Princeton, and more will compete. If you believe you truly belong among them, I suggest you represent us." The room exploded. Whispers ricocheted off every surface. Some students turned to each other in disbelief. One scoffed. Another leaned in, wide-eyed. This wasn't a challenge, this was an execution dressed in opportunity. A national contest wasn't just a test of skill. It was pressure, reputation, and history rolled into one. And Cross knew it. If Julian failed there, everything he had done in this room, all the equations, all the silence breaking would vanish under the weight of public defeat. She smiled faintly, believing she had just set the perfect trap. But Julian, he didn't even blink. He stood tall, voice unwavering. I'll do it. No drama, no fear, just pure certainty. And in that moment, what was meant to break him became his next proving ground. News of Julian's acceptance spread across campus like wildfire. At first, it was just a whisper in the math department halls. Then it spilled into dining commons, library corners, and group chats. The freshmen going to the nationals. Some reacted with admiration, others with smug skepticism. But Julian ignored it all. He didn't accept Dr. Cross's challenge to prove something to them. He accepted it because deep down he knew he was meant to compete on a bigger stage, not just to belong, but to rise. From that day forward, Julian disappeared from public view. Each morning, while the campus still slept beneath layers of frost, he was already in the library, not just flipping pages, but dissecting them. Advanced calculus, number theory, topology topics far beyond his year. He combed through international math Olympiad problems, cracked open research journals, even coded his own practice problem generator. In a quiet corner beneath dim light, he built a fortress of knowledge. His only companion during this time was Leo Ramirez, his best friend and roommate, who brought him food, water, and occasional reminders that Julian was still human. "You're turning into a damn calculator," Leo said one evening, watching Julian scrawl across 3 notebooks at once. "I have 4 weeks," Julian replied, eyes never leaving the page. "They've had years," Leo sighed, "and they've also had mentors, tutors, world-class prep. You're going in alone, man." Julian paused, looked up, and for the first time in days, he spoke without numbers. "I've always gone in alone." Dr. Cross, meanwhile, hadn't been idle. She sent Julian preparatory materials, a collection of problems harder than anything in the upcoming competition. It wasn't help. It was pressure disguised as generosity. But Julian devoured them, not only solving the problems, but rewriting their solutions into faster, more elegant forms. He didn't just want to compete, he wanted to redefine how the game was played. Still, whispers continued to grow. Dr. Sims bet he'd burn out. Others claimed it was all a setup, a spectacle. But Julian didn't respond, because in the fires of pressure, he wasn't breaking. He was forging something far stronger. And soon, the world would see what he had become. The Great Hall of Stanford University was nothing short of intimidating. Vaulted ceilings, marble floors, and rows upon rows of sharpened minds dressed in university crests. MIT, Princeton, Caltech, Harvard, all gathered for one purpose: to prove they were the best. And among them, walking with quiet steps and a calm breath, was Julian Miles. He didn't wear a school pin, he didn't carry an entourage. What he carried was the weight of every whispered doubt, every low voice that said he didn't belong. As he stepped into the main testing chamber, dozens of eyes tracked him, some curious, some mocking, many dismissive. At the far end of the room, a row of judges took their seats, professors and mathematicians from the nation's top schools. Among them sat Dr. Evelyn Cross, stone-faced, arms folded. Beside her, Dr. Harold Sims, smirking with quiet satisfaction, as if simply waiting for the fall. "This is it," he whispered. "He'll break under pressure. They always do." Julian sat near the center, alone. No calculators, no distractions. Just a pen, a stack of blank paper, and a mind honed in silence. A voice rang out from the stage. "Welcome to the final round of the National Collegiate Mathematics Championship. May your minds speak clearly." A large digital screen lit up with the first problem. Within seconds, brows furrowed across the room, pencils tapped nervously. Some competitors froze, rereading the equation. It was brutal, multi-layered, non-linear, and deceptive in structure. Julian didn't move at first. He simply studied. 10 seconds. 15. Then, with a steady hand, he began to write, not slowly, but decisively. Line after line flowed like music. Variables aligned, identities rearranged. He wasn't rushing, he was orchestrating. Across the room, a few students noticed. One whispered, "Who is that guy?" Another glanced at the judges' table. Dr. Cross narrowed her eyes. "Doctor." Sims leaned forward, no longer smiling. Because it was becoming clear, Julian wasn't here to survive this arena. He was here to conquer it. Only 2 pens were still moving. The room, once filled with scribbles, sighs, and shifting chairs, had gone utterly quiet, all attention fixed on the two figures at the center of it all. On one side, Lucian Fang, a PhD candidate from MIT, the golden boy of academic circuits. Years of mentorship, world-class training, and international medals behind him. He wrote with the confidence of someone who had never come in second. On the other, Julian Miles, the unknown freshman from Hawthorne. No prestige, no institutional armor, just a pen, a mind shaped by fire, and silence that had always spoken for him. They sat only a few tables apart, but in that moment, it felt like a world of difference. The final question loomed on the screen above. A monstrous nonlinear differential equation intertwined with multivariable transformations, nested identities, and complex boundary conditions. A question designed not just to test knowledge, but to break spirits. Lucien's pen danced, fast and methodical. Julian? He read the question once, then closed his eyes. The judges glanced at one another. Was he stumped? Had the pressure finally caught up? But then Julian leaned forward, picked up his pen, and began to write. Not frantically, not hesitantly, deliberately. Every stroke of chalk, for he had switched to the board for visibility, came with calm certainty, like someone simply revealing a truth he had already seen. Symbols unfolded with grace, entire sections reduced elegantly. While others tried to brute force the problem, Julian reshaped it, reimagined it, revealing a path no one else had considered. A murmur rippled through the judges' panel. Dr. Sims leaned forward, brow tightening. Dr. Cross remained still, but her knuckles whitened on the table's edge. Lucien glanced over, just once, and that was all it took. His eyes narrowed, because he realized too late that he was no longer ahead. Julian finished first. He stepped back from the board, set down the chalk, and crossed his arms. No fanfare, no triumph, just stillness. Because deep inside, he already knew this wasn't just the final problem of the competition. It was the final problem for their doubt. No one spoke. Not at first. Julian's solution still lingered on the board, a mosaic of logic and brilliance that even the judges were too stunned to erase. His final line was a revelation, a dismantling of everything they believed about who should stand at the top. One of the professors, an elder from Princeton with decades of research behind him, slowly stood. He approached the board, squinting through his glasses, retracing Julian's steps with cautious eyes. A minute passed, then another. And then he turned toward the panel, his voice a whisper, but one that cut like thunder in the silence. "It's flawless." A murmur swept through the auditorium. Dr. Sims shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the smugness long gone from his face. He stared at the floor, jaw tight, searching for something, anything to say. But there was no loophole, no flaw, no escape. Dr. Cross didn't move. She was frozen, still staring at Julian, but seeing him now for what he truly was: not a mistake, not a moment of luck, but a storm she had tried to control and failed. Another judge rose, then another. Applause began. Soft, hesitant at first, but it spread row by row, student by student. Even those who had doubted him the loudest were now clapping. Not because they were told to, not because it was expected, but because brilliance like this demanded it. Julian didn't bow. He didn't raise his fists. He simply turned, walked back to his seat, and opened his notebook like the competition had just been a warm-up for his next lecture. Across the room, Lucian Fang, still holding his pen mid-solution, looked up, his expression unreadable. Defeat didn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrived in silence too complete to question. "And Dr. Cross?" She finally spoke, though her voice was tight and hollow. "Julian Miles has proven that talent has no pedigree." It was the closest thing to surrender she had ever given. But for Julian, he didn't need praise. He had already earned something greater. The silence of those who once doubted him, now forced to listen. The lecture hall hadn't changed. The cold, fluorescent lights still buzzed faintly overhead. The seats still creaked. The chalkboard still bore faint traces of equations long since erased. Students still shuffled in with their eyes glued to screens and hands clutching coffee cups. But something was different. The air, the glances, the silence. When Julian Miles stepped into that same middle row seat, hoodie pulled over his head, notebook in hand, no one scoffed, no one whispered. Some looked up, some even nodded. A few offered subtle smiles of recognition. He hadn't said a word since the championship. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room had watched the video, the final problem, the board, the moment the auditorium exploded into applause. Even those who hadn't been there had seen it, shared it, debated it, and more than anything remembered it. Because what Julian had done wasn't just win, he had shifted the equation of what was possible. Dr. Evelyn Cross entered moments later, her presence still commanding, still crisp in a tailored blazer and icy gaze. But even she, in all her practiced severity, paused ever so slightly when her eyes met Julian's. Just for a second. Then she turned to the board. She didn't speak immediately. She flipped through the pages of her lecture notes with careful precision, as if gathering herself. Then she set them down and faced the class. "Before we begin today," she said, voice level, "I want to acknowledge something important." The room went still. Julian Miles has reminded us all that genius does not ask for permission, it simply arrives. No overstatement, no apology. But every student in the room understood the weight of those words, especially coming from her. Julian said nothing. He opened his notebook and began to take notes, just as he always had. But this time, the silence surrounding him wasn't doubt. It was respect. The class resumed. But it would never be the same. Because in this room, on this campus, and perhaps far beyond it, something fundamental had shifted. And it had all started with a single raised hand, a quiet voice, and a boy who let his mind do the talking. In a world that often rushes to judge by appearances, Julian Miles reminds us of a timeless truth. Real strength is quiet, steady, and undeniable. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand recognition. He simply let his actions speak through patience, discipline, and unwavering self-belief. His story teaches us that talent has no color, age, or pedigree. It doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs courage to rise. For those of us who've lived long enough to see the world change and stay the same in painful ways, Julian's journey is a call to remember that some battles are not fought with anger, but with consistency and quiet resolve. We must never underestimate the power of standing firm in who we are, even when the world looks away. Because the moment we stop letting others define our worth is the moment everything begins to change. This isn't just a lesson for the young, it's a reminder for us all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.